When we think about ethics, it's easy to picture a really clear line between right and wrong, good and bad. But honestly, in the world of data and AI, it's almost never that simple. What we're really talking about is navigating these super complex gray areas, often between two pretty good choices. And that brings us to this powerful idea from the ethicist Rushworth Kidder. This is really the core concept for everything we're about to talk about. See, he believed that the hardest decisions we face aren't about good versus evil. They're about choosing between two competing goods. As he put it, the really tough choices involve right versus right. So, what does that mean for us? What even is data ethics? Well, when you boil it all down, it's really this philosophical struggle, this big, messy effort to build a moral compass for how we handle data. It's about taking those huge, tough questions and applying them to the everyday stuff, like collecting information, managing databases, and using data to make decisions. It's about trying to define what's right when there are a bunch of different right answers. Okay, to really get a feel for this, let's play a little game. I'm going to throw a few quick scenarios your way. I just want you to think fast. What would you do? All right, first one. A boat is sinking, it's way overloaded. To save everyone else, one person has to go. Who do you choose? The grandparent who's lived a long, full life, or the newborn who has their entire life ahead of them? Go with your gut. What's your immediate reaction? Okay, next up. A friend of yours who, let's be honest, is not a great employee, is desperate for a job and asks you to be a reference. The hiring manager calls you up and asks you point blank, would you rehire this person? So what do? Do you tell the unvarnished truth, or do you stay loyal to your friend? Here's another one. You run a really popular restaurant, and to be fair to everybody, you have a super strict 15-minute late policy. A party shows up 20 minutes late, but it's because they stopped to help at a car accident. Do you stick to the rules for everyone, or do you show a little mercy and make an exception? And the last one for you. A city desperately needs a new hospital. It's going to serve 500,000 people, but the only place to build it requires the government to seize 20 family homes. So, do the rights of those 20 families outweigh the healthcare needs of the entire community? So, why did I just throw those crazy scenarios at you? Well, they weren't random. Each one is a classic example of one of Rushworth Kidder's 4 big ethical paradigms. The sinking boat, that was a clash between short-term and long-term values. The job reference was a battle between truth and loyalty. The restaurant was all about justice versus mercy. And that hospital, a textbook case of the individual versus the community. I mean, these are gut-wrenching decisions for any person to make. Now, just take a second and imagine trying to teach a machine how to make these calls. How do you possibly write an algorithm for loyalty? How do you quantify mercy in a line of code? This, right here, is the monumental challenge at the very heart of AI ethics today. And believe me, that challenge is exactly what governments and organizations all over the world are trying to get their arms around. They're literally writing the rulebooks for AI as we speak. But as you're about to see, not all rules are created equal. Generally speaking, these rules fall into 2 big buckets. On one side, you've got ethical guidelines. Think of these as principles companies choose to adopt. They aren't legally binding, but they're great for building trust. And then you've got regulatory frameworks, and these are the actual laws. They are 100% legally binding, and if you ignore them, you could be facing massive fines, lawsuits, you name it. And speaking of regulations, the first major, comprehensive piece of AI law has officially landed on the world stage. It's time to talk about the EU AI Act. And the most important thing to get here is that this is not some far-off, futuristic concept. The act was adopted in June of 2024. The first bans start kicking in as early as February 2025, and the whole thing becomes fully applicable by 2026. This is happening right now. And this act has real teeth. It outright bans certain uses of AI. We're talking about things like social scoring systems, real-time facial recognition in public places, AI that manipulates your behavior. The EU has basically drawn a hard line in the sand, saying these things pose an unacceptable risk to our fundamental rights. Period. Now, of course, the EU isn't doing this in a bubble. This is a global conversation. You've got major international frameworks from places like UNESCO, which is trying to create a universal standard to make sure AI benefits everyone. And then there's the OECD, which has laid out these core principles around transparency, accountability, and human-centered values. And these are way more than just ideas on a piece of paper. The principles from the OECD alone, They've inspired more than 1,000 different policy initiatives in over 70 countries. The momentum for creating responsible AI is absolutely massive, and it's growing every day. Okay, so that's the big global picture. But what does it all actually mean for you, for your job, or your company? Let's break it down and do a quick check to see how this might apply to you. First question, and it's a really big one. Are you operating in the European Union, or do you have any customers who live in the EU? Second question, are you collecting or processing any kind of personal data? And that can mean anything: names, emails, browsing history, anything that can be tied back to a specific person. And finally, are you using data to make decisions about people? Think about things like hiring, loan applications, housing eligibility, or even just deciding which advertisements someone sees online. All right, so let's connect those dots. If you answered yes to serving EU customers, then the EU AI Act applies to you. And it doesn't matter where in the world your company is based. If you're processing personal data, you're definitely looking at regulations like GDPR or the CCPA in California. Making decisions about people? Well, then you've got to think about fair housing and employment laws. And you know what? If you do pretty much any of the above, those ethical guidelines we talked about, they're fast becoming the bare minimum expectation. We are living in the exact moment where the entire rulebook for artificial intelligence is being written. And that leaves all of us with one final, incredibly important question. As we teach our machines to navigate these tricky right versus right dilemmas, whose values, whose definition of right should they ultimately reflect?